But
So I'm gonna run off.
Okay,
Thank
we'll
you
talk
so
soon.
much.
No, thank you.
No,
Glad we
no,
were
no.
finally able to get together.
Yes, just hit square. Yeah, we need to follow up on the other video
Yeah,
too.
okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Thank you,
Great idea.
Andrea.
Okay, good, thank you.
she had a brilliant idea.
Mm-hmm.
We started about a year ago interviewing people who are knowledgeable about Atlanta and about the role of Ambassador Andrew Young. Andrea worked with her father in the book An Easy Burden, which documents his role in the civil rights movement.
Right.
We are looking to produce, in a way, a sequel to that
Okay.
that will document his role in the public life of Atlanta, hence the policy school
Sure.
partnership. We think this is an important story that picks up about 1970 with his first run for U.S.
Yes,
Congress,
right.
and continues probably through the Olympic period. So it's that span of time that we're primarily interested in, but obviously antecedents go way back to that. So we're talking with people like you who know the city, who know Andrew Young and his legacy in Atlanta.
Right.
And we'd like to begin by just some observations about you. I know, aren't you a native Atlantan?
I'm a native Atlantan. I was born here in 1962. I'm not a Grady baby, much to the chagrin of many of my friends who are. I was born in a small private black-owned hospital named McClendon,
Okay.
owned by a Morehouse graduate, and it allowed black doctors a place to practice. So that's where I was born. Grew up here in the city, attended the public schools here, and I first learned of Ambassador Young when I was a young boy attending Camp Blue Star, which was located in Henderson, North Carolina. And Ambassador Young kids, Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King kids attended this 2-week camp. And so I was first introduced to Paula Young, and then the rest of the Young family. So that was sort of my first introduction to the Youngs and to Ambassador Young, though I had sort of vaguely heard of his name as someone who was running for office in my household.
Well, he ran unsuccessfully in 1971 and then turned it around 2 years later and won that congressional seat.
Yes.
And
How well do I remember?
we are documenting that election as best we can. We've interviewed all kinds of folks, and I'll sort of pause and ask you a technical question
Sure.
now. You probably know the resource material for African American history as well as anybody in this town.
Well, in the city, yeah.
Clarence Baycoat's material at the Woodruff Library at CAU.
Yes.
Would it have voting records from his work as sort of one of the
Strategic planners.
This was a very sophisticated electoral process, and there's no appreciation of that fact.
Right.
And we would like to lift that up and document how that was organized and what happened. And it's proven to be very difficult to track that down.
Okay.
Andrea and I met with William Boone a week or so ago.
Did you?
And he said that the material was in the archives. I've talked with the archivist.
Andrea Jackson.
Yeah.
Yes.
And as soon as the regular hours are back up next week,
you are going to make a trip over.
We're going to make a trip over and see if we can see what we can find. But do you happen to know anything about that set of material?
You know what? I unfortunately only the material that relates to Dr. Baycoat as a teacher, as historian. I would imagine, however, that you would find in that collection some of the voting, strategic voting records that you've alluded to in there. I haven't seen it,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean that it's not there. I'm pretty certain that it is there, but I think his role has sort of been diminished in terms of helping not only Ambassador Young, but helping other elected, other candidates to strategically plan, a wonderful strategy on how to get the votes needed. And I think there are some lessons that can even be learned from that period of time that can be applicable now in some sense. So I'd be excited to hear about what you find.
Well,
Yeah.
we've had some interview conversations that have documented this for the first time to me.
Okay.
I'd heard rumors about this, but
Right.
not how it operated.
Sure.
And so I'm excited to follow that up. And that's one of those sort of important footnotes, if you will, more than a footnote,
Yeah.
that we hope to be able to lift out. We had some conversation with Sammy Baker, but he didn't know his father in that
light,
way.
yeah.
And
yeah.
so that didn't lead us closer to where we needed to be. So
Right.
I think we're going to have to depend on whatever documentary.
And you may also want to check with Dr. Alton Hornsby. Do you know Alton?
I know.
Former chair of the department at Morehouse.
Yeah.
But Dr. Hornsby also had access to some of Dr. Baycoat's papers.
And didn't he used to be editor of the Journal of
He was
Negro?
editor of the Journal of Negro History. That's correct.
I knew I had corresponded with him
Right,
in that capacity
right,
over
right.
the years, but that's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
But he is still around.
He's not at Morehouse. He retired, but he's still around.
Okay.
He had some health challenges, but I think I think there's some physical challenges, but I think the mind is still sharp. Mm-hmm.
Well, we've had all kinds of issues with aging people.
Yeah.
We were too late, for example, to interview Jesse Hill,
Yeah.
and that was a tragic.
Yeah. How is he doing?
Not
Not
well.
well.
Receiving excellent care.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Hill was a nurse,
Right.
and so she's able to take care of him, and they have some good help. But
Does he have Alzheimer's?
I don't know
No,
the condition, and
yeah.
she didn't say, but he's
Okay.
not able to communicate.
I see.
And so just, we interviewed her, and she was, of course, gracious and charming.
Right.
And we've interviewed people who worked with him, but we've missed that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I worked with him on a project my first year in Atlanta in 1970.
Okay.
I have closed some loops with people like him on this project in some remarkable ways. Tell me a little bit more about, as you were emerging as a young man, becoming aware of Andrew Young as public leader in Atlanta. You knew he was a candidate.
Yeah, I grew up in a household where my mom particularly made certain that we were aware of men and women who were doing good things and great things, not only in the city, but in the country, by way of books, magazines, and newspapers, which we had subscriptions to. And growing up, I was a real consistent reader of material and information. And I remember watching, I think, Ambassador Young on television. Of course, at that time he was Congressman Young, but I remember watching him and intrigued, and I think what stuck with me that he was the first black elected congressman since Reconstruction. Not really knowing very clearly what Reconstruction was, but just to know that he was the first black, and the very same thing with Maynard Jackson as well, because I always link Maynard and Andy together in terms of the great accomplishments that they made in the 1970s. Of course, you fast forward a couple of years, and I was very much aware of the election of President Jimmy Carter. And the governor of Georgia, and the appointment of Ambassador Young, or Congressman Young, as an ambassador during that time. And by that point, reading about him in Ebony and Jet magazines, which were staples in the black household. But I think when I began to really digest Ambassador Young was the fact that he was a direct outlay from the civil rights movement, and one of the foot soldiers of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because what I see, Harvey, and I think we haven't seen it since, I think the movement's purpose was not only to open doors, but was to prepare and to parlay men and women, not to continue to just march and to picket, but to break open the glass ceiling and open political doors that had henceforth not been open to them. And you sort of look at the soldiers of the movement and what happened to many of them, but probably with the exception of Rev. Abernathy, because I don't believe Reverend Abernathy went into politics. I think he stayed very close to the Southern Christian Leadership Council. Jose Williams ran for office, John Lewis ran for office, Andrew Young ran for office, and so that was the next obvious, I think, step for many of those in the movement, and Ambassador Young really took it. I recall an opportunity of, I think, seeing Ambassador Young on television as the ambassador, on watching one of the local news stations. I was just very much into the accomplishments of folks and kind of studying. Seemed like I recall checking out from the Kaya Heights Public Library a book on, it was a children's book, I suppose, on Andrew Young. And it just gave some basic facts with some pictures and so forth. And so that was a part of the shaping of my wanting to learn more about Atlanta's history. And the turning point for me was at this same Kaya Heights Library around 1973, maybe 72, 73. We were taken to the library to watch all 4 hours of Gone with the Wind as a fourth grader, I believe. I think I was in the fourth grade. And I was sort of left dumbfounded at the end of that experience, only because I wasn't familiar with that period of history in the Civil War, yet it talked about Atlanta. And so I sort of began my quest to document and to collect facts and information on blacks in Atlanta and things that they were doing, positive things that they were doing. Hence, when I published my first book in 1989 with Lone Street Press, I decided to title it Going Against the Wind, sort of my take on going with the wind and what occurred there. And I approached Ambassador Young and Mrs. Jean Childs Young about the project. They were very supportive of it. It was a project of the Apex Museum at the time. In fact, Mrs. Young wrote the foreword for the book, and I spent a lot of time with her. And then that gave me an opportunity to really delve into learning, more about the intricate life of Ambassador Young. I got to know him more intimately, and I'm sort of fast forwarding when I became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is his fraternity. And he, of course, was mayor of Atlanta at the time, and so that gave me an opportunity to really just to become more fascinated with this icon and really a hero. And I use that term. I choose my words carefully, but for me and for many in my generation and decade, he was a hero because he not only put his life out on the line with Dr. King for that period of time that we know as the Civil Rights Movement, but he advanced forward in terms of offering himself as a candidate for political office. And running for office is brutal. And he was the congressman. It exposed me to the Congressional Black Caucus, and he was a part of a wonderful group of men and women during that period of time. Charles Rangels, John Conyers, Barbara Jordan. I mean, just an incredible period that he served as congressman, and then his period as ambassador. And when he ran for mayor the first time, I was a part of a group of young folks who were Young Atlantans for Andy. We campaigned and we put posters out and we wore T-shirts and we did whatever we were told to do within reason and to get Ambassador Young elected to the office of mayor, which some might look back now and say well, he was sort of a shoo-in. I wouldn't say that necessarily, but he was such a well qualified person to advance the city forward. Seemed like one time that Atlanta had a campaign called Forward Atlanta, but Ambassador Young, Mayor Young, then really took that saying and really moved Atlanta to a sphere that it had not witnessed. And of course, we see that in the awarding of the Olympics. I'm convinced, as I know most Atlantans know, we would not have gotten the Olympics in Atlanta had it not been for Ambassador Young, period.
Talk to me about
Yes.
how you got involved in Young Atlantans for
Yeah, just a group of friends.
were you in college at this time?
I was in, his first race for mayor was, help me out, Harvey, was in 70...
Maynard was elected in 73.
Three,
so
and-
in 8 years.
Okay, 81, yeah, I was in college.
Okay.
I was a student at Morris Brown College.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there were campus.
Yeah, well, they were
organizers.
campus organizers, but I stayed close to my friends in the Southwest Atlanta,
Okay.
who were a part of that campaign and got involved.
So it was more your neighborhood.
Yeah, well, neighborhood friends. We had grown up in the city, and then I pulled some of the students together at Morris Brown, particularly the Alphas.
Okay.
As well to work on the campaign and to to really get engaged in the political structure. I wasn't involved in Maynard's campaign, though I remember it very well. In fact, one of my prized possessions is one of Maynard's original 73 campaign posters, which I have in my archives, and a couple of bumper stickers as well, and a pen, But yeah, that's how we got involved with Ambassador Young's mayoral campaign, and attended the inauguration, his inauguration. I watched Maynard's inauguration on TV in '74. I must have been about 12 years old, and it was on a Saturday, I believe. But I remember my mother specifically saying, "You need to watch this." Yeah.
I was getting my tuxedo out to wear this
For the ball.
And my wife said, "We bought that for
The tuxedo. So you wore the same tuxedo, huh?
We had a student wedding Saturday night.
Oh,
And I was able to get in
wow. 8 years later, huh?
more than 8.
Yeah, more than 8. Yeah.
Closer to 28.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, Maynard was a great inspiration
Yeah.
to so many of us.
He was.
I was living in suburban DeKalb County, going to Emory.
Right.
And working at Georgia State, and Maynard was elected, and so we were so energized by the politics of the city of Atlanta.
Sure.
We sold our house and the cabin
And moved to
into
Atlanta?
the city.
Did you really?
And so we've been part of the city of Atlanta since Maynard was, talk
Oh,
about going against the wind.
Yeah.
All the other whites were moving to the
moving.
burbs.
They were.
We moved into
That,
town.
as they called it, white flight at
Yeah.
that time, moving out of southwest Atlanta and other areas and moving to DeKalb County. Yeah.
So we moved into the city of Atlanta and been a part of Atlanta politics ever since. Unlike you, I wasn't able to keep my yard signs and posters, Maynard for mayor.
Yeah.
Every weekend they would get torn down on my street.
Somebody would come and tear them down?
Yeah. So every Monday I'd go to headquarters when I was
Was it the city tearing them down? Oh,
It
no.
was my neighbors were for anybody else but Maynard.
Wow.
He was not well liked
Yeah,
in
he
Buckhead,
was.
as you
Yeah.
may remember.
Yeah, I do. Let's see, and Maynard ran against, was it, he didn't run against Massell, did he?
No, well, the first time he did.
Yeah.
We were living outside the city then, but then 4 years later, it didn't have much opposition. It was when he ran the third time that I was working on the campaign
Okay.
and writing policy papers for him.
Yeah. Who did he, was it White?
He was running against Michael Lomax at the time.
The third time.
And
Yeah, that was a
Michael dropped
bloodbath.
out, and
Yeah.
ended up virtually unopposed, although Hosea did jump in the race.
Okay, just to add some spice to it, huh?
That's what it
Yeah,
did.
Yeah.
But you said that was your first political activity?
Yeah, it was. You know, just the excitement of seeing a campaign, you know, unfold. And then some years later, we took the same, almost the same acronym, and we created YAMS, Young Atlantas for Myrtle Davis, when Myrtle ran, you know, for mayor as well. But I just kind of thought that it was my civic duty, for lack of a better term, you know, to try to be engaged and involved, you know, and I just believed in Ambassador Young.
Now, talk a little bit about your perspective on his work as mayor. You've mentioned that he was an heir of the civil rights movement, taking that into the political arena.
Right.
But as mayor, much of his focus was on economic development and continuing the minority contracting
That Maynard had started, right.
Maynard had started, and expanding that in many ways.
Yes.
And also encouraging international investment in Atlanta. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I'll be happy to. And you know, when I look back on it, I think that Ambassador Young had to serve as a congressman and an ambassador in order to be elected mayor of Atlanta. I don't think that he could have gotten elected earlier, you know, because he was still considered by some, and then, you know, Atlanta has some interesting cultural dynamics. He was still considered an outsider in many ways, you know. He wasn't a native of Atlanta. He was sort of a transplant that came by virtue of the civil rights movement, and didn't really have any Atlanta ties. I used to hear him tell a story about one of the ladies that lived, that was an outspoken advocate for domestic workers, and how she told him that he couldn't win, but if he worked with her, she would help him to win and become, I'll think of her name before we out here, but she's very well known black female. I think she's deceased now, but she was very active in the grassroots movement. And that's what Ambassador Young really had to delve into, that movement, the grassroots movement. I think as a mayor or in any elected office such as that, you have to think years ahead of what the current situation is now. And I think nobody mastered that more than Ambassador Young. First of all, trying to bring in the two communities, the black and white community, the Buckhead and the Bankhead community, trying to put them all together on the same accord, or at least to be able to sit down at the table to discuss the future of the city. I think he was really able to work masterfully with the Chamber of Commerce and the Bureau well, not the Bureau, but the Georgia Trade and Tourist Industry. But he had to help to make improvements in the city that would make Atlanta attractive to others. I think some of that perhaps came at the cost, as you may recall, of some historic landmarks being demolished. Much to my dismay as well as a historian, and I realize and understand we can't keep everything and we can't save everything, but unfortunately Atlanta didn't have, in my opinion, a historic preservation master plan that would have ensured that some of these masterful monuments and homes that should have been saved and not razed were still in place. And so there was a lot of clearing out and a lot of demolishing, a lot of tearing down of old things in Atlanta, and of course under his term. But he was doing what he could to clean up the city and to make it attractive. I think his international exposure as the ambassador really played well for Atlanta and really helped to set the city on its course to become known as an international city. And I think we owe a great deal of that to Mayor Young during his time and during his tenure. I think that I think to his credit, he had always had the ability to really smooth over and soothe all parties and to bring out that which was in the best interest of the city. I think he was really a good, I don't want to use the word manipulator. There's probably a better word that comes to mind, but he was just really able to kind of smooth, as opposed to sometimes Maynard, who could be really just direct and brash. Confrontational. This is how he believed, this is what he saw, this is what he said. I think Ambassador Young's time as the ambassador helped him to have a more sense of conciliatory relationships, and to really bring all of these various forces together. As I recall, he was needed at the time. I think that his election as mayor was very important to the continued viable growth and vitality of the city. And he picked up where Maynard left off, but I think he exposed Atlanta to greater heights and to larger vistas, just because of his international thought, his international acumen, that this small city could be a great international city. And I think that still is his legacy and will continue to be his legacy, on how he was able to convince the forefathers and the city fathers and city mothers that these are the kinds of things that we need to be doing in order to bring job opportunities to the city, in order to improve and increase the economy and economic disadvantage, and not to forego or sacrifice the black community for that. I think he had a really, though not perfect relationship, but I think he was, because of the ministerial piece in him too, I think he really was able to get in, and reach into both communities, the Buckheaders. And Harvey, you're going to have to help me to recall his relationship with the Buckhead community. I know it was better than Maynard's relationship, I think, or at least it was a notch up, from that.
The best story that exemplifies this, he had a friend in Charlie Loudermilk.
Yes.
And Charlie helped him with campaign finance,
Right.
with leadership
Yes.
in his electoral campaigns. And the day after he was elected mayor, and he was
The first time.
about the only white business leader who supported
And
Andrew Young, because the others were pretty well lined up with Sidney Marcus, his opponent. And he scheduled a luncheon at the top of the Mart, and Charlie pulled the people into the room.
right.
And he stood up and said, "I know I was elected without your support. I can't govern without your support." And that was his way of, as you described it a while ago, smoothing relations, or beginning to smooth relationships.
Right.
And everybody we've talked with has cited that moment as signaling
Pivotal.
things are going to be different in the partnership between business and
Yeah, the city.
the political leadership of
Right.
the city. Maynard had been young. He had been the more aggressive person who was needed at the time.
At the time, yeah.
And Andy was the peacemaker,
Yeah.
the diplomat,
Diplomat. That was the word I was looking for.
the person who could soothe the waters. And
Right.
that had been a large part of his role in SCLC as
Right.
the
The
guy
temper
who was,
flare, yeah.
because you needed a Hosea Williams
Right, you needed that
who
fire.
could lead the show
Yeah,
troops,
yeah.
but you also needed somebody who could meet with the white sheriff.
Right. Yeah, true.
He had had that role. And
And that's sort of always been his role.
and he's played it extraordinarily well
Yeah.
over the course of the years, and that's, I think that luncheon story tells quite well,
Right.
and what the next 8 years were
What
really
would it be-
like
right.
in terms of bringing the business community along with it. It's been interesting to talk with white business leaders about that moment.
Yeah. Have you talked to some who were there?
Oh, yes.
That's good. Yeah.
And it's fascinating in for a lot of different reasons. But it marked the transition period in his. He had begun the transition, in his words, from civil rights rabble-rouser to public official a long time before.
Right.
But this was where it really began to hit the road.
Okay.
And a fascinating process from then on. A question or two,
Yes.
as historian now, looking back on this legacy, say 100 years from now.
Right.
What do you think people will feel about Andrew Young? What would you want them to know most importantly about Andrew Young as a public?
Sure. I would want people 100 years from now, or 50 years from now, to know that Mayor Young was one of Atlanta's greatest visionaries, who not only created the vision, but went after it. Because you can put a vision out there, but you may not necessarily be the one who runs after it. And I think that Ambassador Young had the unique and uncanny ability to not only to plant the seeds, but to nurture, to water it, and to watch it cultivate. I think and again, being very fresh off of 2 weeks of the Olympics here, you can't help but to think about and ask the question, how did Atlanta, Georgia get awarded the Olympic Games? I mean, in comparison to many of the other major, larger cities throughout the country and throughout the world. And what was it? Who was it? And we know it's not just one person, it was a group, but there was a resonating theme or idea that had to permeate to convince the Olympics Committee that this city not only could handle the Olympics, but given its history and the visionary leadership, that it should be here in the the home of Dr. King. I think that's going to be one of his defining moments, and I don't think that full story of how we got it. I know we focus on it coming here, and he's the president of the Augusta Golf Course now, Billy Payne, and Billy Payne's role. But I don't think that we have yet to see a definitive book, on, and maybe that's the book you're alluding to, which is so needed, on his role not only in the Olympics, but I think the Olympics not only opened the doors to this great, huge sports venue, but attracting and bringing in international relationships to this city that had not yet been done. As a president of an organization, I get it, and I understand how you can have a vision and thoughts and ideas, and other folks don't see it. They can't get it. They can't buy into it yet. It seems to be too far-fetched. It seems to be too advanced for them, or we don't have the resources to do it. And so I think Ambassador Young's legacy will be his international expansion of the city, and his continued visionary thinking for this city and all of the entities, business, education, and other aspects of that, and the fact that he will be remembered as a peacemaker. I think his finest moment, his finest hour for me, and there are many, were his remarks following the Olympic Park bombing. And only Ambassador Andrew Young could have mastered that moment to begin to bring some healing about something so tragic and devastating taking place during a peaceful game. Very early on, Harvey, when I first heard him speak, I said, I want to speak like him, and I want to be able to speak without paper. This was when I was about 18 or 19 in college, and I heard him speak, and he had no notes. And I said, God, how do you speak without notes? I'm 18-year-old mind. Well, first of all, you got to have some content. You got to have life experiences. You have to have experience, have to have lived, have to have read, and absorbed to be able to convey and to spit out masterful eloquence on various thoughts, topics, and subjects. And I think that he has been able to do that. And so his legacy is going to be multidimensional. I don't think it's going to be just one thing, but I think for the city, he was the international translator of dreams for Atlanta, and really helped to put Atlanta on the on the map in a way that other southern cities have yet to reach or would only hope for. Just a very forward thinker.
One of the things that's important in our thinking is to try and get a handle on Atlanta
Okay.
and what makes Atlanta unique. How would you describe what to you makes Atlanta special,
Okay.
different?
Sure. I think Atlanta is unique, and I'm going to speak from an African American perspective. That's really the only perspective I know. I think the creation of the Atlanta University Center Schools and the creation of this educational hub where you have 5, 6 colleges that constantly and annually puts out into the community a group of educated black men and black women on a consistent basis for the last 150 plus years almost, I think has really helped Atlanta to be and to develop into a very sophisticated, intellectual, urbane mecca for achievement. And so I marvel that if you take the AU Center out and take all of those schools out, we'd be really, it would not be a balanced. I think it would, Atlanta would be a southern town without the influence of the educational arena. And I think it would probably have a lot of southern gentility, but it would lack the sophistication that we have seen that has been uniquely Atlanta. And so, we've seen over a period of time, we can go back to the 1906 race riot when they had that horrible riot that occurred, which resulted in the killing of several people downtown Atlanta. Mr. Herndon's barbershop moving as far as to the Browns Mill community where Clark used to be located. But the city fathers came together. John Hope, who was president of Atlanta Baptist College then, now Morehouse, and of course you had the intellectual capacity of W.E.B. Du Bois and others. They came together to create the Atlanta Interracial Cooperation Commission. Long name, but I think it was a landmark group of men and women, black men and white men, coming together, I think really for the very first time, to sit down at the table to discuss how we can improve and work out racial relations in the city of Atlanta. And I just don't know that many cities had such ingenuity and foresightedness at the turn of the century. Now, Market, you had Booker T. Washington here in the 1890s at the Atlanta Cotton States Exposition. Of course, he was the appointed spokesperson for the race and spoke at this all-white exposition. I think that was landmark too. I think that there have just been some pivotal moments in Atlanta's history where we have been able to resolve issues without the violence and without the conflict that other major cities have had. And that's always been unique Atlanta. Even with the building of the first high school in Atlanta in 1924, the Booker T. Washington High School, where you had Reverend A.D. Williams, who led the charge along with the NAACP to create and establish this high school. You have the establishment of the first black policeman. Again, Daddy King, Martin Luther King Jr. Sr. led a peaceful demonstration from Ebenezer to bring attention to the hiring of black policemen. We've just sort of been able to manage it, but it has to be cooperation on both sides, I think. And for me, that's the uniqueness. We see it very clearly with the death of Dr. King and how, of course, Robert Woodruff pulled the city together. And while this is Atlanta's saddest hour, all the world's eyes will be on Atlanta. And Robert Woodruff led the charge with then Mayor Ivan Allen, to create a peaceful city during such a turbulent time as other cities were tearing their structures down and destroying each other. Atlanta has somehow uniquely been able to manage the peacefulness of it and to get along. I think that the greatest moniker and logo for the city was the one that said, "Atlanta, the city too busy to hate." That's one of my favorites. And I think that we've demonstrated that, and I think that Ambassador Young has helped to make sure that we are busy and we remain busy, so that we're not covering up the things that we need to do, but that we're looking at how we work together, how we sit at the table together to try to create, opportunities and to create a city that, that is respected by many and that is drawn. And I think you asked me about Atlanta. I think the fact that it is able to draw a fairly sophisticated black middle class to the city, and that it's been able to draw international businesses to the city. I think, and still in a very small way, and it's a small way, to retain some of its southern charm. Not a whole lot. We're no Charleston by any means, but I've been here long enough to know that we have just very strategically and methodically done the right things at the right time with the right people. Mayor Allen bringing the Braves, bringing professional baseball in. I think football came with him as we are a year or so later, So I don't know. I don't have just a short answer, Harvey, for that, but I think that Atlanta is unique in that way.
What would you say some of the crucial lessons we ought to be teaching new generations, younger generations of Atlantans and cities elsewhere about who we are and what makes us special?
I would say that the crucial lessons ought to be how to work together for a common good. I think that when you're able to do that, the city advances. If we're talking about how do we benefit the city, people advance. Does it mean that we hide our problems? No, we don't. It means that we address it and we try to work together to identify solutions and problems, and to work towards coming to some kind of reconciliation. I think that the T-Splost taught us a whole lot of lessons about kind of where we are and how that was handled. Of course, it's the fifth quarter. What is it? The fifth, as they call it. There's a term, and obviously I don't know the term well because I can't remember. But it's perfect for, in hindsight now, when we look at this Monday morning quarterback. You're brilliant, Harvey. You're brilliant. Yeah. When you look back on it now, I think, and I don't want to get into a whole lot of discussion on that, but I think the approach was all wrong. I think, we could have looked and handled and played this out differently, so that the issue was not an issue. It became an issue. Okay.
Boone had some really interesting
thoughts
observations
about how it was handled.
We had lunch with him the
Did
day
you?
after the
Oh, yeah.
election. And so
What did he say? It was poorly handled?
He said that the whole thing was kind of a top-down, and there wasn't adequate consultation with neighborhood level folks,
Yeah.
particularly in the African American
Right.
community.
Right.
And you had very disparate groups opposing it, and very few folks with incentives to support it. And so he had a really, I thought, really,
Boone's mind is still working, huh?
never doubted that.
Wow.
He and I ended up on a lot of programs together.
Together, I bet.
So we've every time we're on a program together, we say, we got to get together, have lunch.
Yeah.
And
So you were finally able to do that.
finally, I just said, I got to have lunch with you. So
Yeah.
we set it up and made it happen. But and I invited Andrea to join
To
us
join you, yeah.
because she didn't know him,
Okay.
and so I thought that was.
You're speaking of William Boone, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I asked him what he prefers to be called, and he said Boone.
Boone. Is he still teaching
Yeah.
at Clark?
He's at Clark, Atlanta, in political science.
Yeah.
So he's a good fellow.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed listening to him and learning from him as we've appeared on various programs and panels
Right.
together. I just thought it was time to sit down and learn. So
Well, here's what we got to do. We got to capture, and this is what you're doing in essence, but we got to create a formula over the last 40 years that looks at Maynard, Andy, Bill, and Shirley up to that point, to come up with I think a blueprint for growth and development of cities and building communities and community relations, and I think that this is certainly the time to do that, and because it becomes really becomes a blueprint and a study guide for urban development and growth, in cities similar to Atlanta, where you had, these consecutive, let's see, 4, Maynard, Andy, Bill, and Shirley, these mayors, right, who have helped and worked to do that.
it's going to be an interesting history to help write.
Right.
What frustrates me as historian in this process is we have a clear agenda of a book and a documentary film as our objectives.
Right.
And yet, I think there's enough material already for probably 5, 6 books.
Oh, at least.
And I think that's unfortunate that it's going to take us so long to unpack each of the themes and elements in this process.
Right.
But if we can help future generations of Atlantans, this kind of started when Andrea was going through Leadership Atlanta.
Okay.
And she invited her dad to speak, to present sort of a retrospective
of the city.
How the city got to be where it is. And nobody had heard those stories.
Right.
And so all of a sudden it became obvious to a new generation of leaders that here was information that everybody needed to know to take their places as leaders and maybe help other cities in the same process to learn what we've done that's made Atlanta.
It's a mammoth project.
It is.
It really is. And you're right, there are many subject areas and books in the making just on that,
We wrote a paper, the two of us and our graduate assistants wrote a paper and gave it at an academic conference of urban affairs specialists in the spring. And
how did it go?
I really enjoyed the feedback and the exposure to the ideas, but we took probably the most controversial theme to develop, and that is the minority business development under Maynard and Andy. and how that, first the shock troops and then the consolidating that process under the second 8 years.
Right.
And how that has transformed the opportunity structure for
Right.
African Americans
Right.
in the city. You spoke so eloquently of the graduates and the generations of graduates from
Right.
the AU Center institutions. The sad part is many of those people had to leave.
They had to leave,
Atlanta
right,
in
for
order
opportunities.
to get
Sure.
economic opportunity
Right.
because they couldn't practice whatever trade.
True. Yeah.
Because the doors were simply not open.
Right.
But after Maynard put his foot in the door
Yeah.
and said, you will open the doors to minorities.
Yeah. And a big foot that was too.
Grass
Yeah.
will grow on
Yeah.
the runways
Right.
of the new airport and all of that
Yeah.
rhetoric. But he was very serious about making minority business development
Right.
a requirement.
And Mayor Young really had no choice but to solidify it, to lock it in.
And did so
Mm-hmm.
in tremendous ways.
Right.
And then carried that same process on into the Olympics.
Right.
And so it's become virtually identified with the Atlanta way of doing
Right.
things.
Right.
Is a partnership not just in name,
Yeah.
but in fact.
Yeah, I like that. The Atlanta way of doing things. I think that's even alluding back to my comments about 1906. There's just been a way, Atlanta way, that we've done things historically, throughout.
I have an article on that aftermath of the race.
Of the race
riot.
riot. You wrote it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll send you one.
Okay.
Do you have, can I have
I'll
a
give you
card
my,
with your
I didn't bring a
email?
copy, but I'll give you my email address.
Okay.
Yeah. Send it to hmason@morehouse.edu.
That's the race riot article.
I'd love to see that. And
I was interested in a specific subset of people, actors, in the aftermath
Okay.
of the riot, but particularly white and black clergy
okay.
and the role that they played in the aftermath
Right.
of the riot. And people like H.H. Proctor
Mm-hmm. Henry Proctor at First Congregation, of
Right.
course.
and others. He was, without doubt, the best educated minister
Mhm,
in
in the
Atlanta
city,
at the
yeah.
time. And his meeting with the pastor of St. Luke's Episcopal Church.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first time that white and black folk had sat
Sat
in
in
a
the room
room
together. Yeah.
And they didn't necessarily do so on terms of equality, but it established a process
Mhm.
and it led to an organizational structure that many people feel is the basis for
Mm-hmm.
what is now the Regional Council of Churches.
Churches, okay.
All of that. So there's been a tremendous subsequent history
Right.
of the white and black clergy working together
Mm-hmm.
that was all forged in the aftermath
Okay.
of that horrible event. I was part of that commission to commemorate
The
race riot
centennial. Yeah.
and worked for 3 or 4 years in advance
Right.
of 2006.
I remember those activities. Yeah.
Cliff Kuhn and others.
Where is Cliff now?
He's same old Stan down at Georgia State.
Really?
Yeah. He never changes.
I haven't seen Cliff in years.
He's on that radio gig that you talked about on public radio, many of those history spots.
Oh, is it? Okay.
He's the narrator for. He's probably done as much with oral history.
Yeah, he was always the oral history
And
guru.
he's
Mm-hmm.
now brought the headquarters of whatever the National Association of Oral Historians
Mhm.
is going to be headquartered
Here in
GHU.
Atlanta? Oh, good.
So there'll be even more
Mhm.
attention and resources. And what we're doing is definitely part of that work.
Right.
he's very much aware of what we're doing.
Okay.
And we're drawing on what he's done.
He's done already, yeah.
He has interviews socked away with people that we can't have access to anymore.
Why?
People who are deceased and
Oh, okay, but he has interviews of them.
Right.
Right, yeah, that's...
that we're.
I'm surprised he didn't get Jesse Hill during that time.
I am too.
Yeah.
But I don't think many people recognized Mr. Hill's importance.
Right.
And he was such a busy guy. He never really sat down.
He never sat down. He was always... When I worked at the Herndon home
Right.
in college, and that's when I was introduced to Mr. Hill, who was chair of the board of Atlanta Life at the time. And I don't know whether he was chair of the foundation, but he was on the foundation. But he was just a bundle of energy
Oh.
all the time, just moving.
Step into a room.
Yeah, yeah.
Deal with what the issue was.
And then
zip on
step
to the
out.
next
That's
meeting.
always been his style, you know.
It's rather interesting that he played such a pivotal role in Andrew Young's campaigns.
Campaign, right.
When we've interviewed Andrew Young, and we have, I think, now 5 interviews on tape.
Okay.
That's a wonderful experience.
I bet.
When you sit down with him, you just turn the
You
machine
just turn the machine on and let him talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Don't
No,
ask
no,
questions.
no questions to ask.
Just
Yeah.
let him talk.
Yeah.
But he would say, at 5 a.m., I would have to get up out of bed and be downstairs in my study because the phone was going to ring at 5 a.m. The first call of the day
What's Jesse?
was Jesse Hill calling to line up the day and what the campaign was going to do that day and how it was going to get it done. And usually the last call of the day was about 10, 11 at night. Jesse Hill.
Recapping, huh? God.
But he just went on that kind
Mm-hmm.
of energy from 5 a.m. till midnight,
Wow.
6 days a week.
Mm.
And then on Sundays, he was, of course, head of his church school and all the civic activities that he crammed into Sundays. Just an amazing man.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to get not only Mrs. Hill, but Henrietta Anthony.
Yeah, yeah.
We went down to her home
And interviewed her. Mm-hmm.
5 hours. We finally stopped and said, we've got to quit now.
Yeah.
I had,
Well, she worked for Mr. Hill, so she was right there in the thick of it. And
oh, she was,
Yeah.
and she just has such a wealth of stories.
Yeah, she does.
And I carried 2 of these
Did you?
interviews, and Andrea's got incredible recording capacity.
On this computer. Mm-hmm.
But it was all tapped out. We had maxed out our recordings.
Wow.
And so we said, we've got to
Time.
stop.
Yeah.
And so,
So you could have gone on for a couple of more hours,
we
I'm sure.
started for the door, and she's telling one more story. They were just wonderful
I know.
stories.
I bet.
And
Was her sister with her?
no,
Okay.
no, it's just
Just her. Mm-hmm.
The other interview that has stood out to me as one of the most special
Mm-hmm.
conversations was Rita Samuels.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know her.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know who she was.
Yeah.
We went into her office and sat down and
At
started
SCLC.
listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then she just,
She's a talker, though.
she turned to me and said, how many people do you know who've worked for 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners? Just that kind of
Right.
insight.
Let's see, she worked for Dr. King. Who else did she work for?
Jimmy Carter.
Oh.
She helped Carter get elected governor,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked her to come work for the state, so she worked for the state while he was governor. And then she just turned to me and said, how many people do you know?
Wow.
But she's so special.
Yeah.
And so wise.
Mm-hmm.
We asked her the summary question, how would you describe Atlanta? And she said, Atlanta's about connecting the right people. It doesn't get much better than that.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And Well, you've had some eloquent
That's-
international translator of dreams.
Yeah.
That's money there.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts as we wrap up?
No, you know, I think my last thought would be, as a young man coming of age during the height of his political run as congressman, as ambassador, and then subsequently as mayor, in a time when there are very few legitimate men and women that you can call sheroes, as Dr. Jonetta Cole would call them, my dear friend, and heroes. Ambassador Young is one of the last of the Mohicans. He is really just, and what I love most about him is his accessibility and the ability to approach him. And I think that is unique, and he loves to refer to, or I've heard him say how he will make his way to speak to the hotel staff, the folks that work in the kitchen, the grassroots, the common. I think those are life lessons that have come to him, that these are really the people who make things run, And it's the humbleness, I think, of him. He's as internationally renowned as he is, and world renowned, he has also a sense of humility and humbleness that is just so refreshing in a leader of his stature, and of his note, and I'm just so proud to call him my friend and mentor. A few weeks ago I celebrated my 50th birthday, and I wanted it to be very intimate and small. I had about 125 people at a breakfast at Morris Brown. And I had Ambassador Young, Joe Lowry, and John Lewis, who all came, all, in my opinion, to the very same way in terms of just accessibility and approachability. It was just special for me, that he would think enough. And he had just gotten back in from some trip, because he's always just getting back in from somewhere, But he was there bright and early, so it's been an honor to share a few words with him about him for your project, and it's a great project, and I hope that many more will be inspired.
Well, I think so, and I guess that's one of the things that has been the most awesome to me, is talking with folks like you, who are part of what I've learned to call youngdom.
Youngdom.
The followers of Andrew Young.
Right.
And I think one of the marks of a great leader is the ability to inspire followers.
I think so.
And we have met people, black and white, who were inspired by Andrew Young 40 years ago, who continue to be part of Youngdom.
Youngdom.
The kingdom
Young's kingdom. I love
of Andrew Young.
Right.
And I think that's a great tribute to the man.
I like that, Youngdom.
I don't know that that'll find its way into print.
Well, it should. I think it should. Youngdom.
But,
the younguns in Youngdom.
Right out here, Marion Jones
Yes.
and Carolyn Moore. These are people who have been part of that group of followers
For years.
for years.
Yeah.
And yet they continue to be inspired by him.
By him, yeah.
Thank you,
Harvey,
Skip.
thank you so much. Good seeing you.
Always
Let me
good
give
to
this
see
to
you.
you.